So thank you for coming to my talk on the impact of individual choices. So as part of our Eco-vember 2020 month of looking at environmental issues that are currently facing the planet. It's very easy to believe that the problems the world faces at the moment are just too big for us to solve. And so often people feel, what's the point? My small changes won't make any difference. And our own impact is going to end up being minimal. So what I'm hoping to do today is persuade you that your individual choices do matter, and also talk a little bit about some of the choices that you can make in order to help the planet. Let's start off by looking at why we should make individual changes. I think there are three key arguments to this. Argument number one is the moral duty. So moral duty is doing something just because it is the right thing to do. Now, there's lots of reasons why it is the right thing to do to make these individual changes. One of the main reasons is that the Earth's systems have evolved over millions and millions of years to form this stable, interconnected web of lots of different processes. And if we tip these systems in one way or the other, it's going to affect the whole system and throw the whole planet out of balance. The other argument is that there's a tremendous beauty and wonder in the natural world that needs to be saved. There are species that are threatened with extinction that will never evolve again. And even if we're not around in a couple of hundred years, a couple of thousand years, because of the impacts that we're making, the life on Earth is going to look very, very different. And it'll be a great shame to lose the amazing life that we currently have on Earth. Finally, we also rely on the natural world for our food, our medicine, and a whole variety of other natural resources. So in order for our survival, we need to nurture these resources and to also help serve future generations. So those resources are around for our future generations. The second key argument is that our small individual changes have what I call an incremental effect. So these changes may seem small by themselves, but as a person, they start to add up to have a big effect. The same also applies if we add those effects up across the globe. If the whole population starts making small changes to their lifestyles, that adds up and has a big effect. The final reason links closely to the incremental effect. Making these changes means that you are a role model for other people to encourage them to also make these changes. And that also has the effect of boosting this incremental effect that all these small changes add up. It also has the impact on a larger scale. So if a population, if a group of people decide these changes are important to them, that puts pressure on politicians and governments to also make those changes. Let's have a look at some of the changes that we can make. One of the big ones is our food choices. This picture shows that over 25% of the greenhouse gas emissions that go up into the atmosphere actually come from the growing, production and transport of our food. In fact, about 70% of the mass of birds on the planet is actually just for livestock, just to feed one single species, just to feed us. If we look at this in a bit more detail, we see that this has an impact on the natural world as well, in addition to the greenhouse emissions. The farming of beef and the rearing of beef accounts for over 50% of the deforestation that is currently happening in Brazil. That is closely followed by the farming of soy plantations, the majority of which actually goes into feeding the beef. So we're having this double effect. We're cutting down trees to make room for these cattle ranches to grow the beef. We're also cutting down more trees just to grow soy to feed the beef that are on these ranches. Without those trees, the carbon that's locked up in those trees ends up entering the atmosphere, but also they are unable to take the carbon dioxide back out of the atmosphere that we are emitting. It also has an impact on biodiversity, causing there to be a massive loss in the range of species that are living in these areas. The rainforest houses many unique species that only live in very, very specialized niches. That means that the conditions are just right in that spot. It could be that one vine grows on one particular type of tree in the rainforest that feeds one particular type of insect. If you cut down the rainforest, you're destroying a whole ecosystem just in a very small area. So what can we do about it? Well, one of the obvious things is to reduce our meat consumption, either by introducing more vegetarian or more vegan food into your diet. Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone on the planet immediately changes and becomes vegan overnight, but if everyone makes a small change to their diets, as I said before, that will add up to a big difference. So, for example, you could start off by having meat-free Mondays where you don't have any meat, or a meat-free weekend. It's estimated that if you go vegan for a week, you will reduce your carbon emissions to the point that would be equivalent to driving about 63 miles in a car. So to put that into perspective, that's about the same length as my weekly commute going back and from school. So if I go vegan, that means essentially I'm offsetting the carbon emissions from my petrol car. It's important that these dietary changes are taken in along with thinking about the health effects. It has been established that a largely plant-based diet is actually better for our health compared to a largely meat-based diet. But these ultimately come down to individual choices. As I said, I'm not saying that everyone should necessarily go vegan, but if everybody is able to reduce their meat consumption, even by a small amount, that will have a big effect on the emission of greenhouse gases. The next area where our choices matter is to do with consumer power. Whenever you buy something, essentially the shops, they want your money. Okay, and this puts us as a consumer in a powerful position to demand either a better quality of product, or if we're thinking about other areas of environmental issues such as plastics, we can put pressure on the shops to provide more alternatives where they reduce the amount of plastic that's being used. Looking at the energy choices now, fortunately, you guys don't have to sort out your energy bills at the moment, but when you're older, you'll have to decide what energy company you use to pay for your electric and potentially your gas. Now, not everyone is going to be able to afford to put solar panels on their house or to have a local wind turbine nearby, but the cost of renewable energy in general is coming down. And it's estimated in the next 2 or 3 years, the cost of renewable energies will actually be cheaper than the cost of fossil fuels. And in fact, in some countries around the globe, this is already the case. So even if you can't afford to put solar panels on your house, there are more and more green energy providers there, and it's well worth looking into these. You can also consider where you put your money. Again, you may have a savings account that your parents or your folks at home have set up for you, and you may not have much control over that at the moment. But as you get older, you'll have more and more control over your money, and you can decide where you want that money to be held. Do you want it to be held with a bank that is still investing in fossil fuels, or do you want it to be invested in a bank where they are investing in renewable energy and green initiatives? Finally, linked closely to this is the idea of voting. Your voice matters and your vote matters. And it is up to the political parties, no matter who they are, to earn your vote. So you should be voting for the politicians and the parties, the governments that best represent your views and your interests. And that just doesn't apply to environment and climate change. It could be on a whole host of things like equality and welfare. And if you don't find that any of the people in power or who are running for office, if you don't feel that they represent you when you're old enough, you can run for office and you can make that difference. So to help us make some positive choices, I'm going to go through some key logos that you can look out for when you're buying food and when you're on your weekly shop. So one of the ones to look out for is the Rainforest Alliance certified logos. It's the one with the little frog on. And this logo is from an organisation that does a lot of work in protecting the rainforests, promoting local communities. And so you'll see this badge on things like coffee, on tropical fruit, on flowers, all sorts of things. So if you see this logo, it's a good bet that it's come from a sustainably sourced rainforest. The second one to look out for is the Soil Association, and this one particularly tells us whether or not it's been grown organically. And that means it hasn't used pesticides and herbicides that will harm the local environment. And this is particularly found on fruit and veg. If you eat seafood, then the logo to look out for is the Certified Sustainable Seafood by the MSC. Okay, so again, look for this blue sign, and this comes from a fish stock that is sustainably managed, and they have rules in place to stop overfishing of these stocks. And finally, not wholly linked to just environmental issues, but the Fair Trade logo helps to promote sustainable farming in local communities, and this is found on things like chocolate, bananas and sugar. So those are just 4 examples of logos to look out for, just to help inform you when you are buying various items on your food shop. I do have a word of warning though. There are lots of logos on food and they can be very, very confusing at times, and it's not always clear what exactly they are representing. So I'm going to show you 2 now that I want you to take with a bit of pinch of salt. So the red tractor logo often appears on vegetables and often on meat products as well. This logo though only certifies that it comes from the UK. It doesn't give us any details about the animal welfare standards, and in fact the animal welfare standards that they have are very minimal, and it's actually run by a farming organisation, so they've got a bit of a biased view on the criteria that need to be met for this particular badge. The other one is the RSPCA Assured logo. Now the RSPCA does a lot of good work in terms of animal welfare, but this logo again only really tells us that the animals have a minimal level of welfare standards, and in actual fact it still allows battery farming to happen of chickens and pigs, for example. Now this is a particular issue, and it's become more of an issue recently because the more the animals are packed in close together, not only is it not ideal in terms of their general well-being, but there is an increased risk of disease transmission. And in actual fact, COVID-19 is thought to have started in food markets over in Asia, where there is a huge amount of animals packed into a very tight area, and that allows these diseases to be spread very easily. It also increases the chance that antibiotics are being used and are being pumped into their feed. Now, this is a particular problem in America, but it's the same in the UK as well. These antibiotics are used so that the animals don't get common bacterial diseases, but they then end up in the environment. And that's where the bacteria in the environment can become resistant to these antibiotics. And that means if those bacteria then infect humans, we've got no medicine to treat them. So a couple of words of warning with those. With all these factors and all the issues that are facing the world, it is very easy to have a sense of climate anxiety. And this is something that I've felt myself at times. We can often feel that the problems are just too big to solve, and we can feel very lonely when thinking about these problems. We can often feel that the actions that we are taking as individuals are not enough or are too small. and that actions in general being taken by the entire planet are too slow or not enough. In some cases around the world, you'll also have the more imminent threat of floods or droughts or storms. We're lucky in the UK that we live in a relatively stable climate where these are less of an issue. So here are some tips just to help manage that climate anxiety. The first thing to realise is that it's okay that you don't have all the answers yourself, and it's okay that the wider world doesn't have all the answers. The important thing is that we look at what successes there are and use those to help promote more successes. So if you're feeling that level of anxiety, think about some of the success stories that I've been talking about on our Hopeful Fridays videos. Also, try and think more locally based rather than the entire globe. What local actions can you take to help improve your local area? Are you able to provide some wildflowers in your garden to promote more bees to come to your garden? Are you able to have a compost bin to reduce the amount of waste that's going to landfill? And also, just make one small change at a time. It's easy to feel that we've got to make all of these changes all at once. But if you make one small change at a time, wait for that to become a habit, then you can make the next small change. Wait for that to become a habit, then you can make the next small change. And over time, as I said, those small changes will add up into something substantial. The final thing I want to touch on is this idea of growth. And this is more of a global idea. So countries around the world use this measure of growth as their key number for success. So let's have a little look at what this number actually means. Growth is measured by something called GDP, and it's made up of some different areas. Consumer spending, so that's us spending money in shops. The government spending, what are they buying? What are they investing in? And also what we export. And what this ends up being is essentially just a number about money. And this idea that countries always need to be growing means that they are constantly using up resources. And there's only so many resources that we've got on the earth. It's not a very sustainable way of looking about a country's success. I'm going to contrast this though with New Zealand. So in the last couple of years, New Zealand have marginalised the use of GDP when they're thinking about their success. And instead, they've come up with a well-being budget. So anytime they want to implement a change or particular policy, they always have to link it back to their well-being budget. And it's got lots of different strands. So they need to think about the health implications on the entire country, on individual populations, the equality of their change to different groups of people, the impact on the environment of their particular change, and also the impact on future generations. And they still do use GDP a little bit, so there is some economic input as well. But you can see it's a much more balanced way of looking at the success of a country. So as a planet, we need to move away from this idea of constant growth and think more about how the planet can thrive. How can we sustain a plateau where there's a high quality of life for everyone around the planet? So to finish off, I just want to say that we've got a beautiful blue planet. It's the only one we've got. And so we need to preserve that, not just for ourselves, but for future generations as well. We need to be not apart from nature, but a part of nature.